Leilu Nishmas, his grandfather, his mother's father, and I believe it's Rav Pinchas ben Reb Zev Klein. Benji, please correct me if wrong. It's Rav Pinchas ben Zev Klein, whose yahrzeit is today. Yud Bei Sivan is Neshama Shel Aliyah. He should be made Yosher on his family and for Klal Yisrael.
Amen. Shkoyach. Yes, it's correct.
I also want to thank the company ID Tech for giving me permission to use their boardroom so that I can say share without getting disturbed by noise in the background. So you should have a lot of atzlachah. So let's see the Halak Gemara weiter. So yesterday we were learning about the weight of the different balls of wool that we needed to accompany 3 karbanos. The paraduma, which we said needed to be weighted according to one shita. The sir mishaleach, which needed to be pulled apart because they had part of it on the horns of the seir and part of it on the rock. And then there was the mitzvah that also needed. And the Gemara agreed mitzvah doesn't really need anything great, so it was mishkal shekel. The sir mishaleach needed 2 saloim because you had to cut it in half. And the para, which needed weight, needed mass to it, was a sarazos. Amar b'yoichanan, Peligi bar Rab Shimon ben Chalafta v'Rabbanan b'para. There was actually machlokes between Rab Shimon ben Chalafta and Rabbanan when it comes to paradum. Chad Amar Mishkal Asar. One said it has to weigh 10 zuz, which is the heaviest. The Chad Amar Mishkal Shekel, which is the lightest. So it was a machlokes in extremes. One said the lightest of the 3, and one said the heaviest of the 3. Nobody said in the middle. So avesimanech to know that the machlokes was a machlokes mikotza lakotza is echad hamarbe ve'echad hamamit. So Rashi quotes the whole Mishnah. It said echad hamarbe ve'echad hamamit. If you do a lot or a little, uvachi chavan liber l'shamayim. As long as the kavanah vayid is to do things l'shem shemayim, whether he does more or less, the Rebbeinu Shalom is not focused on the quantity. The Rebbeinu Shalom is focused on the quality. So Zot Rashi b'simin zeh, remembering this Mishnah, Tiskar Loima, you'll remember that the machlokes that we just discussed over here is echad nosam bashir hamarbe mekulam. One picked the highest share of 10 zuz, but echad nosam bashir become a ma'it mekulam, which is the share of a shekel. Aval shir beinini lehuskarkan. That's not even an option. The shir beinini is not an option that any one of these 2 amiroyim, Rabbi Shimon and Chalafti and Rabbanan, neither of them hold that it was 2 shekel. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah midifta l'Ravina. Loi b'parapligi. The machlokes that you quoted by paraduma, if it's 10 zuz or a half a shekel, it's not, or if it's a shekel, is not by paraduma like you just mentioned. Rather, ela b'sira mishtaleach. The machlokes is by sira mishtaleach, and there's a machlokes whether there you need 10 zuz worth or just a shekel worth. And the day that they had this machlokes in the Besmedrash, noch nafshe de Rabbi Bar Kisi. Rabbi Bar Kisi was nifter that day. And since he died that day, they made a simon to remember what day he died. And they said to Rabbi Bar Kisi, mechaper kisir mishtalech. Since he died on the day where they were discussing the shear of yarn for the shear mishtalech, people said, oh, his misas mechaper, just like the shear mishtalech was mechaper and Klal Yisrael. And Rashi says, misas tzadikim mechaperes kedamar ba'alma. Lama nizmecha misas aharon levigdei kahuna. So the tzaddik Rabbi Bar Kisi, his misa was mechaper, just like the Sir Lazazel is mechaper on the Averis of Klal Yisrael. Amar B'Yitzchak, Shtei Shchita Shemaki. I heard a halacha said regarding 2 shchitas, the shchita of 2, I'll call them karbanos for lack of a more accurate word. Achas shal para, which is not really a carbon, the paraduma. The achas shal paroi, the power of the Kohen Gadol that he brings on Yom Kippur, relevant to Arson. Achas Ksher Bizar, one of these 2 animals could be shechted by a Yisrael or a Levi, but not a Kohen. The Achas Psul Bizar, and one of these 2 animals cannot be shechted by a person other than a Kohen. But V'lo Yodanami Haiminayu, but I don't remember which is which. Itmar Zakt Gemara, we have a machlokes shchitas para upara. This same shaila, there's the 2 cows that we're talking about, the par aduma and the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Rav Shmuel, there's machlokes between Rav and Shmuel regarding this. Chad Omar para psula para kshera. One of the 2 said that the par aduma needs to be a Yisrael, needs to be a Kohen, but the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, the Shaychit could be a non-Kohen. The Chad Amar and the other one of the two said, Parei Psula, Tumfakert. The par of the Kohen Gadol has to be shechted only through a Kohen, but the Paraduma Kshera can be shechted by any Yisrael. Tistayim, the Rav Hu the Amar Parei Psula. We didn't identify who held what. So the Gemara wants to prove that it's a Rav who said that the Paraduma needs to be shechted bedafke with a Kohen. The Amar Rab Zeir said, Shchitas para bizar psula. Rab Zeir said that the paraduma must be shechted with a kohen, just like what we want to argue Rav said. The Amar Ravala, and Rav commented on what Rab Zeir said. Clearly, if Rav is commenting on what Rab Zeir said, it must be that Rav agrees to Rab Zeir. And he gave the reason for Rab Zeir. Because Elazar v'chuka shaninu ba. In the parsha of Paraduma, which is the beginning of Parshas Chukas, it says, "Unesatim oisa el Elazar HaKohen." Take the par and give it to Elazar HaKohen. Elazar HaKohen means it has to be done through the Kohen. And right at the beginning of the parsha, it says, "Zois chukas haTorah." Whenever the Torah uses the word chuka in a parsha, it's teaching us that everything in the parsha is ma'akev. It's not just saying it. So since it mentions that Elazar HaKohen had to deal with the paraduma, and it says chukah, it proves that the paraduma has to be shechted by a kohen. We'll soon see if it has to be a kohen gadol. So Zok to Gemara, from here you see that Rav is the man the Amar who holds that the paraduma must be shechted through a kohen. Rav, Maishna Par, why is he saying that the paraduma needs a kohen? Tichziv Elazar v'chukah, like we just said, paray nami. The par of Arai, which we're arguing now, Rav holds does not require a kohen for the shechita. In the pasuk of Achri Mois, when it discusses the par shel Aaron, Haksiv Aaron v'chuka, it says in the pasuk Vikav Aharon is par chatas hashaloi, and then it says V'oisazois lechem l'chuka soilam at the end of the parsha. So the same two ingredients that indicated to Rav that the par aduma has to be shechted by a kohen, those same indicators exist by the partial iron. Yet we know Rav will hold that the partial iron does not require a kohen. And the Gemara, shchita lav avoidi. When it says chukah in the parsha of Achri Mois regarding the avoidus that are done on Yom Kippur, that's only referring to avoidus, but the shchita is not an avoida. So therefore, chukah will not apply to it. So Rashi will like kaima chukah shchita. The word chukah, which says it's dafka, everything's dafka, that's only referring to avoidus. But the shechita is not an avoida. Frank Gemara, ihacha paranami. If it's not an avoida, so then when it says chukah by the paraduma, it's also not referring to shechita, it's only referring to the other avoidus. Dr. Gemara, no, because shiny para, the kache bedek abayisi. The whole paraduma is not a carbon to begin with. So nothing's an avoida. So if nothing's an avoida, then chukah is going on everything. Frank Gemara, Falav Koldachenu, is it not a Kavachimer? Madach, the Shchita, by a carbon of the partial iron, does not require kahuna. Shchita, on something that's not even a carbon, it's only Bedek Abayis, surely shouldn't require a claim. So Amar Pshisha Berei Ravidi, Midi the Hava Marish Nagoy, that's not a good Kavachimer. Because you find things that are not carbonis that still require a coin, such as Maris Nagoyim, the lava voidahi. It's not an avoida for the kohen to check up if the person has a neg or not. Yet to voy kahuna, yet it could only be done through a kohen. And Akiva explained this when you learned the sugya of Nagoyim in Tazria and Tzara. I think Akiva spoke out of Sicha that the reason why a dafka has to be a kohen because a kohen is having a talmid of shalah harin oyev shalom v'roidev shalom. Only somebody who cares so much about others that their oyev shalom v'roidev shalom is trusted to condemn somebody to the tumas tzaras. Anybody else we wouldn't trust. That's what Akiva told us. The deeper meaning is. But on Kalponim, you see that the fact that something is not an avoida doesn't necessarily say that kahuna is not important. So basically, what Rav is saying is, it says chukah and it says Aaron by the parish of Aaron on Yom Kippur. Nevertheless, it doesn't apply to the shechita because that's a real carbon, and the shechita is not an avoida, so chukah doesn't apply to it. But when it says chukah and elazar by the paraduma, where nothing is an avoida because it's considered bedek abayis, there we'll say it applies to everything, even to the shchita, and it's not difficult to accept that the shchita by the paraduma should be more chomer than the shchita of the partial iron, because you find even non-avoida items need to be done through a kohen. Shmuel, we know Shmuel holds the opposite of Rav. So Shmuel, the Omar Parei Psula, he will hold that the partial iron will be possible unless it's shechted through a kohen. So I will ask the same question. Why does Shmuel say that by the partial iron only a kohen could shecht it? Because it says aharin and it says chukah. So once again, by the paraduma as well, why is it that Shmuel says it does not require a kohen? And for the Gemara, shayni yasov by paraduma, tichsiv v'shachat oisa lefanov. It should be shechted. The pasuk in Chukah says that the paraduma should be shechted in front of the kohen, which is mashma she'ezor shoichet v'lo. It just means that a lozer has to supervise the shechita, but the pasuk doesn't say that a lozer has to actually perform the shechita. So now that's a huge point, because now it changes the whole picture. The Torah never says that a lozer has to shecht it. It says v'shachad oisa lefanov. So now we'll turn our focus on Rav. How could Rav say that this pasuk is saying that the kohen has to shech the paraduma? It says v'shachad oisa lefanov. It is shechted by others in front of the kohen. When the pasuk says v'shachad oisa lefanov, it doesn't mean that it's not a lozer. Avad is a lozer, but it's teaching us another halacha that he cannot be Mesiach Tas. And Rashi says, which is Shmuel, but the Rav holds a lozer shach. Rav holds Avad a lozer shach in the paraduma. Umay lefanov. So what does it mean v'shachad oisa lefanov, which seems to indicate that someone else shachs it? That shelo yasiach daita mishmiros. That's to teach you that the Kohen Gadol has to constantly, throughout the entire process, be focused on the paraduma. Otherwise, it'll be possible. So, Zok the Gemara, Ushmuel shelo yasiach daita minolei. How does Shmuel know? Where does Shmuel see in the psukim discussing paraduma that the Kohen Gadol cannot be Mesiach Das? So, the Gemara Nafkali, he learns it from a later pasuk, where it says v'sarif as a paraleinov. The paraduma should be burnt in front of the Kohen Gadol. So that's how you know that the avoidance of the paraduma must be done without any hesach hadas. Why do I need two psukim? V'sarfas aparaleinov and v'shachat eisolafanov. Twice to teach you that you cannot be Mesiach Das. Once I know that you can't be Mesiach Das by the shchita, so that should tell me I cannot be Mesiach Das by the rest of the avoidance, and vice versa. Once for the v'sarf, you can't be Mesiach Das. Surely you can't be Mesiach Das anywhere else. You actually need the pasuk with Dafka to tell you sai by shchita and sai by shreifa that you cannot be Mesiach Das. Why? Utricha. Because of our Rachmana b'shchita, if the Torah only told us that by the shchita the kohen can't be Mesiach Das, that's because the shchita has a very big significance. It's a very important avodah. It's the first avodah in the process of the paraduma. So maybe you got to start off without hesach hadas. But other avodas, maybe you wouldn't have to halt cup the whole time. Because of Rachmana b'shreifa, and if the Torah only told you that by the shreifa of the paraduma you have to halt cup and not be Mesiach Das, I would say b'shum dahash tehu miskash repar. This is the final step where the ashes become the paraduma that could be matar a person. Avol shchita, but maybe the shchita, which is just a first step of a sequence, maybe it's not significant enough to require complete concentration. So that's why you need both psukim. So we have a pasuk to tell you that you need to be concentrated by the shchita, and you have a pasuk that tells you that you need to concentrate by the shreifa. But if there's psukim that are telling you concentrate here, concentrate there, it's obvious that there's other areas that don't require concentration. What are those areas? Where don't you have to concentrate? Zok the Gemara. Ilaima lemute. Now, there's a girsa change over here, and I'm going to use the girsa change of the Gra because it makes it a little bit more geschmack. Ilaima lemute milui mayim v'kidush. If we're trying to be mamayit, that when you fill up the cup of water from the spring and then you pour it into the ashes, if you learn that that's where you don't have to concentrate, it would be too difficult to argue that. Because Lemishmeres, Lemanidixid, the Pasuk says, referring to getting the water from the spring and then pouring it into the ashes, the Torah uses the word Lemishmeres, it should be watched. So you can't argue that doesn't require focus, because the Pasuk seems to indicate Meferish that it has to be focused. Elo Lemute Asufas Afra must be that after they burn the paraduma, there's a pile of ash. So you got to gather that into a container. So when you're gathering it into the container, there you can be Mesich Das. And Vashlacha Seitz, we also learned that when the paraduma is burning, you have to throw 8 eres ve'ezoi, like we discussed earlier, you have to throw that into the fire. So it's those avoiders that don't require kavana. By those avoiders, Hesach Das will not pass it. Again, I'm referring back to the Girsa of the Gra. The lav gufa the paradinu. They're not direct avoiders in processing of the para. It's after the para was already done. Getting water is a satellite avoider. Mixing the ashes into water is also a satellite avoider. Those do not require focus the whole time. Zok the Gemara. So now what we have is we've explained the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. There's two paras. There's the para aduma and there's the para shel iron. Rav held that the para aduma has to be done through a kohen and not the para shel iron, and Shmuel held that the para shel iron has to be done with the kohen and not the para aduma. Itmar shchitas para bizar. The shchita of a para aduma can be done with the zar. So that clearly is not Rav. Ravami Amar, Shera, it's kosher with Hazar, which is like Rav. Nafcha Amar, Psula, it's going to be possible. Ula Amar Shera. So you see, not only is Rav and Shmuel arguing about it, we have two additional pairs of Amayroim that were arguing about it. It was Rabami was arguing with Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, and Ula said Psula. Ula said Shera of Amar Psula, and there's a machlokes what Ula said if it's kosher or possible. So Meser Rabbi Shua bar Abba l'Siyuda Rav. Rabbi Shua bar Abba wanted to ask a kasha to prove Rav's point. And what did Rav say? The Amar Para Shchitasa B'Zar Psula. We want to prove that Rav is right, that the Paraduma has to be shechted by a kohen. Because the Brisa says as follows: Ein li ela hazos meimeha shein sherim be'isha kavish. I know that when you're actually spritzing the water and ash mixture of the Paraduma on the person that's tamei, I know for sure that it must be done with a man, not a woman. A, and B is vein ksherin el b'yoyim, and it can only be done by day. So we just made two assumptions: A, that the person spritzing the paraduma has to be male, and B, it has to be done by day. Where do we know those two assumptions from? So Rashi tells us, Hazos memeina ein ksher b'isha l'kamon mefarishla. That is yet unknown. We're going to see soon in the Gemara where we know that the person who spritzes the paraduma must be male. That we know from the pasuk. D'chsiv hu yischata boy b'yoyim hashlishi. So since it says b'yoyim, we know that the spritzing of the paraduma water can only be done by day; it cannot be done at night. So we know two things about the spritzing of the paraduma. A, it has to be done with a man. B, it has to be done by day. Minayin l'rabbis to many other avoidus that are done for the paraduma, such as shchitasa, kabbalah stama, hazah stama, sreifasa, vashlachas eitz eres ve'ezoid, ushnitoilas. How do you know that all of these things also have to be done by day? Because Rashi tells us, minayin l'rabbis shchitasa, the Kabbalah Stama, Hazah Stama, Sreifasa, Vashlachas eitz eres ve'ezoid, ushnitoilas, the layuk shein el b'yoyim. What the Bryce is looking for, not regarding the fact that it has to be done by a male. The Gemara is looking, how do we know that these have to be done by day? Lagabe, how we know that these could only be done by a man and not a woman, I don't need any special limit for that. In each of the avodas of the paraduma, if you look through the psukim, it either mentions that Elazar HaKohen has to do it, or it says HaKohen has to do it. So since all of these avodas, it's mefurish in the pasuk mentioned that these have to be done by Elazar, by a Kohen, we know that it cannot be a female, it has to be a male. What we're probing is how do you know that all of these avoiders are also only kosher to be done by day? Talmud Leimer Torah. It says, referring to the carbon of referring to the paraduma, it says Zois Chukas HaTorah, and we learn from there Torah Achas L'Chal Avedasa, which tells us that just like the avoida of the zrika has to be done by day, so too this whole list of avoidas can also only be done by day. Zok Gemara, Yochal Shani Marba, or just the Brisa continuing, Yochal Shani Marba Af Asifas Afra Umilu Mayim V'Kiddush. I might also think that the gathering of the Ever Paraduma, filling up the water from the spring, the kiddush, and mixing with the ashes, you might think those also have to be done by day. Talmud Lemer Zois. The Torah says Zois. Only these things have to be as hakosov kan kayim val toisef. Only what says has to be done by day beferish, not any extra avodas. So basically, you have two words. One that's saying include everything under this rule that it has to be done by day, and then you have Zois that's saying don't include everything. So what did we do? You see from the Brisa that we're including the avodas in the original list, the shechita and zrika and sreifa, but we're not including the asifas afra and the shopping of the water and the mixing. Why do you pick this list to say cannot be done by day, and the other list you say could be done by day? Maybe flip it around. We have a riboy to include a group of avodas that have to be done by day, and we have a miyut of zois to say it doesn't have to be done by day. Amrit will say, let's compare everything to the avoda of the person that's spritzing the water mixed with ash on the person that's tummy. We know that the person who spritzes the water, there a woman can't do it, it has to be done by a man. And and it could only be done by day. Afani Avi, Shchitasa, the Kabbalas Dama, Azas Dama, Usrefasa, Ashlochas Eitz, Erez Ve'eze, Vishnitalas, Hoil Venkshern Beishakavish, and Kshern El Bayon. The other list, the list of the Sreifa, the Shchita, all those items have a halacha that they have to be done by a man, not by a woman. So since it has that similarity with the Zrika, which also has to be done only by a man, I'll say that the same way it's similar to the avoida of spritzing the water, l'gabe di halacha, that it could only be done by a man, it's also similar to the avoida of the Zrika, that it could only be done by day. Zok to Gemara, Shen Ksher Misha Lish, because it says V'lakach Ezai V'tavel B'mayim Ishtar. We're going to soon see how do you know, because at the beginning of the Brisa it said that the Zrika cannot be done by a woman. How do you know that? So Rashi's now telling us because it says V'tavel B'mayim Ishtar. It has to be a male. So the same way, all these avoidance in these lists of Shchita, Kabbalas Dama, Azaz Dama, Shrifasa, Shlachzei, Shnitalas, they all have to be done by a man. That makes them similar to the avoida of spritzing the water on the person that's tamei, and therefore it'll have the other similarity with that avoida is that it has to be done by day. But I'm going to exclude asifas afra umilumayim b'kiddush hoyluk shermi. Since a woman can do those avoidas, she can gather up the ash. She's allowed to fill up the jug of spring water from the spring, and she's allowed to mix the water with the ash. She's allowed to do that. So therefore, we'll also say kasher nami v'yoymu v'layla. That those avodas can also be done not only by day but by night as well. So this is the brisa, and from this brisa somehow we're supposed to know that the shchita can only be done with a kohen. How do you see that? We're talking about shchita has to be a man. Where do you see anywhere in this brisa that the shchita has to be done by a kohen? How does this prove anything that the shchita has to be done with a kohen? So Rashi, Shmuel. If you want to say that since this brisa is saying that the shchita cannot be done by a woman, so automatically that also means it cannot be done by a zor, what's the connection? If you're going to say from the fact that we've proven that these avoidance may not be done by a woman, so that automatically tells you that it has to be done by a kohen, who said? Spritzing the water of the paraduma on the tummy person will prove to you that you don't make that connection. That avoidance cannot be done by a woman, it must be done by a man, but uksheim bizarre. The Torah explicitly says it does not have to be done by a kohen. That can be done by a zor. So why not argue that all these other avoidance, such as the shchita, although a woman can't check, but maybe a zor could check. This is how you see from this brisa that it has to be done through a kohen. Because Isha, my time, where did we get it from? How do we know that a woman cannot do shchita? And all these other ways, how do we know it from? It's because it says alozar. In the parsha of shchita, it says alozar. Isha, my time is a crash. How do we know that a woman can't do shchita? Bishlama kabbalas dama, vazdos dama, ksivalakach alozar akoyin midama. Hanu kabbalah, it says v'hiza al noichach pnei al moed, hanu asa. But all of these avoidance, it says beferish that it has to be done through a lazar kohen. Ushrefanami le'ilmi noksiv kohen, b'adav v'sarvus apar le'enov. The lazar, it has to be done in front of a lazar. V'ashlachas eitz ve'ezoiv kohen siv. So all of the other avoidance besides shchita, the pasuk is very explicit. It says it has to be done through a lazar or through a kohen. But where does it say that a woman can't? A lazar my timer, a lazar v'laisha. That's where it says a woman can't do shchita. From the fact that this brisa is assuming that a woman may not shech the carbon of the paraduma, it must be that the way this Tana interprets the pasuk, it must be that this Tana is saying that when it says v'shachat lois lefanov, we had a shayla. Does that mean a zor can shech in front of a lazar, like Shmuel learned, or did that mean that a lazar himself has to shech? From this Tana that excludes an isha from the shchit of the paraduma, it must be that he learns the pasuk like Rav, and that the lazar himself has to shech. It must be a lazar kadorshle Tana karav. It must be that the Tana this brayso learns like Rav. The isha hey acher shoichet v'lazar roya kedidar Shmuel. If you're going to argue that this Tana dashes like Shmuel, that it does not, the shchita does not have to be done by a lazar, he just has to supervise it, well then mehechem emayit isha. How in the world does this Tana know that the shchita must be done by a male? It must be elo mea lazar darshli. The only possible source to the halacha that a woman cannot check the paraduma is because you learn it out of a lazar, that a lazar has to do it, and a lazar is a male. Once you're saying that a lazar literally means that a lazar has to do it, and therefore it excludes a female, well then by definition, mamiti nami zar. So then you'll also exclude a zar, because not only is a lazar a male, a lazar is also a kohen. So therefore, you see from this brisa that states that an isha cannot check the paraduma, you see from there as well that a zar cannot check the paraduma. My tama a lazar isha, zar nami a lazar v'leizar. So this is a proof that this brisa holds like a Rav, that a lazar is the one who does the shchita of the paraduma, which excludes both a female as well as a non-kohen.
Yosy, I'd just like to bring a bit of a historical proof. Why bedafka lazar? We know from Chazal that the Parshas Chukas was given on the first day of Nisan, and it's the same day that the Mishkan was inaugurated. It's also the same day Nadav and Avihu were killed. So why Lazar? Why Nadav and Avihu? Because they already died that day. So the next in line was Elazar at that point. So that's why he was chosen, because there are only two Kohanim left, and he's the senior Kohen.
Why couldn't it be Aaron? There's an answer to that, and we're about to see. Elazar was not the Kohen Gadol; he was the Skan.
That's
he was the
right.
Second in command, and that's going to be very significant now.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it segues right into the next Gemara. Amar Ula, Kala Parsha Kula, the entire Parsha of Chukas that discusses the Paradum. If you go through it, it's confusing. Mashma moitzi miad mashma. there are some places where pasuk B will paskin directly the opposite of pasuk A. So if pasuk A said something's mutter, pasuk B will say it's aser. Or if pasuk A said something's aser, pasuk B will say it's mutter. Umashma mela, and there are some psukim where pasuk A and B seem to say the same thing. And the Gemara is going to go now. Ula is going to go now through the parsha and analyze pasuk by pasuk and show you where things contradict the previous pasuk and where they don't contradict. Now, none of the contradictions are going to be on this daf. The contradictions we'll get to tomorrow. Now, the pasukim that we're going to discuss will not be the contradictions. What you have to do is take the paraduma, the pasuk says, and give it to Elazar Kohen. So the Gemara darshans oisel Elazar, v'lo l'dayris l'Elazar. Only the first paraduma gets done through Elazar Kohen, but future paradumas do not have to go through Elazar. So what does that mean?
How could it? After he's dead.
The position of Elazar, which was the skan. Only the first paraduma is done through the skan. Future paradumas will not be done through the skan, which is unclear because ikadami l'doris b'kohen gadol. Futures cannot be done through the skan. That has been through the kohen gadol itself, which explains right away why it wasn't Aaron HaKohen, because the Torah is almost purposely vague, saying it should be done through the skan, but others aren't done through the skan, so you might learn it has to upgrade. It has to be done through the kohen gadol itself. The ikadami l'doris b'kohen hedged, and there are those who went for carrot. The first paraduma required the skan, but all subsequent paradumas can be done by any kohen. Zok Gemara, the most obvious way to understand the pasuk is that you shouldn't require a kohen gadol for future karbanos. And why is that? So Rashi says, the since the Torah was purposely vague and didn't specify exactly what the position has to be, it just says Elazar, who happens to be Nishtahin and Nishtaher, it proves to us that Kol Kayam Ksherim. When the Torah is vague, that's not vague, that's making a point. That means anything is allowed. And that's the most simplest way to learn it. But if you want to learn that in future Darius it has to be done by the Kohen Gadol, Minolai, how do you see it? Elazar was a skan. That all the other future paradumas must be prepared through the Kohen Gadol. Zok Gemara, separate limud. Gomer chuka miyoim hakipurim. We learn chuka from Yom HaKippurim. By Yom HaKippurim it is chuka, and there we know it has to be done only by the Kohen Gadol. So we'll apply that same premise to paraduma. It has to be done only through the Kohen Gadol. Next, it's given to Elazar Kohen. The pasuk says, "V'hoitzi oisa." He should take it out to Harazaisim. And we learn from there, Oisa, you're only allowed to take the paraduma. You cannot take multiple animals with you. When the Kohen Gadol takes, or the Kohen takes the paraduma, he could only take that one par with him. He can't bring friends along. What if he couldn't stop the paraduma? It refused to come. So you want to bring some other animals, so this animal will follow the other animals. You cannot bring a black cow with it, that maybe if it has company, it's going to be willing to go. We don't want people to say that it was not a valid paraduma. They shechted the black animal. You can't even take a second paraduma with it. Because they shouldn't say you shechted two. And Rashi tells us that the Mishnah in Parah, Perek Daled, Mishnah Daled said that if you do any other malacha while you're doing the paraduma, it'll passel the paraduma. So if you do two paradumas at the same time, each paraduma will passel each other. Therefore, you could only bring out one paraduma at a time. Rabbi Aimer, no, it has nothing to do with that svar. It's because there's a Xeris HaKosov. Shenemar Oisa, Levada. We have a pasuk that tells you that the paraduma must be brought by itself. Why would the Tanakama say this svara that it's because you can't bring two together because they'll say shtayim shachtu? You have a pasuk. You have a pasuk and you have a svara. Man Tanakama Reb Shimoni. Who is the Tanakama who says the reason is because shaloyim shtayim shachtu? It's going according to Reb Shimon to Dorish time of the crop, which means when the pasuk says something, he analyzes why the pasuk said it, and therefore, if it doesn't apply in certain places, then you won't apply it. So Reb Shimon says that there's a svara to it. So therefore, it's not a blanket rule. There'll be an exception. Sometimes you will be able to take another animal out. My benayu, where is there an exception? If you didn't take a cow, you took a chamor. So zokt Rashi the Tanakama Shari. According to the Tanakama, it's going to be mutter, even though it says a pasuk oisel avada, but there's a reason for it. It's because Shema Yoimru that both of them are being used as a paraduma. But since one of them is a donkey, everybody knows that that's not the case. So the pasuk of oisel avada will not be in such a case, because you could dash in the reason for the pasuk, and therefore you could say it doesn't apply in certain cases. But the Rebbe Osir, because he holds you don't darshan why the pasuk said something. The pasuk said oisel avada, which means oisel avada, no matter what, no matter when, even the chamar you would not be able to take out with it. So that's the first two limudim that we learned, that we're darshaning from the pasuk of paraduma. The first limud is that only the first paraduma was done through a scan. The future paradumas were done either through a kohen gadol mamish or through any kohen, depending on how you learn. And the second thing that we learned is that the paraduma has to be brought only by itself to Har Mishkat Har Seisim. It cannot be brought with any accompanying animal. And that was also machlokes if you could bring a chamor with it, or if the prohibition is only that you cannot bring out another animal with it. So far, this is from the group of psukim that are not at all contradictory. They're all parallel. Okay, I'm not sure what time it is. I don't know if I watch here. It's 7:44. Oh, so we have some time still, so we can go a little bit weiter. Zog to Gemara weiter. V'shachat oisa. Then the pasuk continues and says v'shachat oisa. And what we learn from there is shelo yishchait acheres ima lefanav. You shouldn't shecht another one with it. So what does that mean? L'rav. Remember, we already had the shachat oisa. Shelo yishchait acheres ima lefanav. Sorry, I read it wrong. The shachat oisa means shelo yishchait acheres ima. You're not allowed to shecht another animal with it. So not only can't you bring another animal with it, you can't check another animal with it. And then there was the lefanav. And this we already discussed. It's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, who learned that Elazar himself had to shecht the paraduma, the kohen has to shecht the paraduma, lefanav teaches you shelo yasiach taitim, that you're not allowed to be yasiach das, you have to be focused on the paraduma the whole time. The Shmuel that we learned earlier, who said that that it means that he doesn't shecht it himself, rather shecht lefanav, another person shechts the paraduma in front of Elazar. So he learns sheizar shoichet v'Elazar raya. So this pasuk of lefanov, it's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel how to learn. Rav learns it teaches you that you shouldn't be mesiach das, and Shmuel says it teaches you that it's not a kohen that has to shech the paraduma, it could be a zar. And remember that the Gemara asked, how does Shmuel know that you can't be mesiach das? And the Gemara said Shmuel knows it from Vesar Faisal lefanov. Okay, then it says v'lokach. The pasuk says v'lokach Elazar HaKohen, and this is referring to the Kabbalah's Dam. Rashi says v'lokach Elazar HaKohen midama be'etzboi, from his blood of his finger, and he spritzes it al noichach b'nei al moed. So what does that mean? According to Shmuel, the reason why the pasuk says this is lahadure la'Elazar. We said that the shechita could be done by a zar, so the Torah has to tell us that now we're switching gears, and the Kabbalah and the Zrika needs to be done once again through a kohen. L'Rav have a mirachamiyat. According to Rav, we already know the shechita has to be done through a kohen. So why is it repeating now again that the Zrika, the Kabbalah and the Zrika also has to be done through a kohen? So we learned when mit achamiyat el rabbis ta'afilu kohen hedjit. Although the shechita has to be done bedafka through a Elazar a kohen, the Kabbalah and the Zrika can be done through a kohen hedjit. That's how Rav's going to learn. Then it says v'lokach hakohen eitz areas the ezoiv ushni telas. L'Shmuel, it's teaching you ta'afilu b'kohen hedjit. All of these avodas can be done even through a kohen hedjit. L'Rav, Rav already told us that the Kabbalah and the Zrika could be done through a kohen hedjit. So why do I need a pasuk to repeat again? The further avodas are done through a kohen hedjit. We're already talking that a kohen hedjit is doing the avodah. The Rav Itrich. So kedai de chamina, even the lav gufa the paradin, since the eight areas of Ezav and Shtidalas aren't directly related to the processing of the paraduma, they're sort of satellite auxiliary items. Loyli by kohen, they wouldn't need a kohen at all. Kamash v'lon, that they have to be done through a kohen. Let's see Rashi. We look at Kohen Eitz Eretz. The Shmuel Domer Kabbalah Vazal Bel Lozer Havoi. According to Shmuel, who holds that the Kabbalah had to be done dafka through the Kohen Gadol, through Elazar Kohen, the Skan. Ksiv b'Kohen lachshure ashlochas Eitz Eretz b'Kohen Hedin. The pasuk says that a regular Kohen can do these avodas, even a Kohen Hedin. So now, Zok Rashi, now we found the concept that Ula mentioned earlier, where pasuk B is switching gears from pasuk A. Have a high mashma, moitzim yad mashma. So this pasuk is switching gears. It's like up until now, the Kabbalah had to be done through a Lazar Kohen. That these avodas, the Eitz Eretz ve'ezov, they can be done through a regular Kohen Hedjed. So you see, we switched gears, and that's what Ula meant before. That some psukim are switching gears. V'chein kol hani damrina, and all the rest of the items that we're going to say that switch gears. Ula Rav the machshir Kabbalah b'Kohen Hedjed, and according to Rav, who said that the Kabbalah Saddam could be through a Kohen Hedjed, have a high mashma memela. According to Rav, then this is continuing on with the same idea that the Kabbalah and the Zrika were able to be done through the Kohen Hedjed, and nothing changes when you proceed to the Lakichas Eitz Eretz Ve'ezov. It also is with the Kohen Hedjed. So he learns that it's mashma memela v'einamoytzim mechlal mikra shalafanav, and it's not changing gears. So according to Shmuel, it was changing gears, and according to Rav, it wasn't changing gears. Why did the Torah have to say that the Lakichos Eitz Eretz has to be done through a Kohen if we're talking about a Kohen already from the last avodah? Because of a Lakach Eitz Eretz, v'loiksiv Kohen, if the Torah wouldn't have specified that a Kohen is required here as well, havabina v'lakach kol mi sheyirtza, then I would have thought that even the Yisrael can take it. V'loy havim kumina loy a Kohen. I wouldn't have said that it has to be a Kohen. The Kabbalah sol kedai dechemina hayol v'lav gufa d'avodah. The Kabbalah, I would have assumed that that's the Gufa Voida, the Paraduma, the Kabbalah and the Zrika, they have to be done through a Kohen. But the Lakichas Eitz Eretz Ve'ezov, which are sort of auxiliary things, they're not directly related to the processing of the Parah. I might have thought it could be done through a Zar, Kamash Malon, that it needs a Kohen. Okay, I think we should stop here, and the Mitchell will pick up here tomorrow morning.
Yossi,
Yes.
I'm a little confused about the mechanics, the process. So this is done on Har HaZeisim, the Shechita?
Yes.
And the Kabbalah must be done on Har HaZeisim as well.
And the Zrika as well.
The Zrika's on that? Where?
Right. Remember we learned the Gemara that he has to spritz towards the Heichel. And remember we said that he has to be able to see from his position on Har HaZeisim, he has to see the door of the Heichel. And he spritzes towards the door. But of course, it's not getting anywhere near there.
Okay. So he doesn't spritz on the Mizbeah.
No.
Okay, that's a little more clear now. And what about the Tameh? It's Metame Tahirim, right? So who exactly becomes Tameh?
I know the person who handles the Efer Paraduma. I don't know if it's the people that are being mocked to the carbon. I think it's the people who handle the ashes and the water. But I think it'll become clear as we go through it.
Okay.
Because it says whoever carries the ashes is going to become Tomei, and is going to become Tomei. So the way they did it is they shechted the carbon, they burnt it there, then they gathered the ashes in a container, right? But they didn't mix it with water. It seems like whenever they had somebody who needed this Rika, then they just mixed a little bit amount with water at that time. But it seems like it was stored dry. And they just mixed it with, it's like a concentrate. They stored it dry, and whenever they needed to spritz on somebody, they mixed some ash with water, and then they used the water. But the water doesn't seem like it was saved. It was just the ash that was saved.
Okay, shkoyach.
Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
You too.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.